Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, scholars, and students. It is my absolute honor and privilege to extend a warm welcome to you all to the workshop on Indian migration to the EU, challenges and prospects, organized under the Monnet module on migration issues in the European Union, the Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. This workshop is the second of the three events to be organized under this module, and it has been carefully curated to bring together scholars, researchers, professionals engaged in migration studies. We received an overwhelming response with over 100 applications from scholars, early career academics, researchers, and professionals from diverse backgrounds. After a rigorous screening process, only 37 participants were selected, among whom we are delighted to host 4 foreign nationals. The workshop is structured on a sandpit framework, fostering a highly interactive and collaborative environment. Over the next 2 days, participants will engage in working group meetings, poster presentations, and the thematic discussions to explore key aspects of Indian migration to the EU, from historical trends to governance and policy frameworks. The format ensures deep engagement, cross-disciplinary insights, and meaningful exchanges between participants and experts. For this inaugural session, we are privileged to have an exceptional panel of distinguished guests. Let me first extend my deepest gratitude to Professor Amitabh Mattu, Dean of School of International Studies at JNU. Professor Mattu needs no introduction. His distinguished scholarly contributions have been foundational to the field of international studies in India and abroad. Professor Mattu will chair this inaugural session and deliver the opening address. I am honored to welcome Professor Umu Salma Baba, Joe Monnet Chair and Chairperson of the Center for European Studies, a leading scholar whose pioneering work has significantly shaped European studies in India, and she will be delivering the inaugural address. We are also privileged to have Professor Binod Khadria, an eminent scholar from JNU, former JNU professor, and at present President of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, who will deliver the keynote address. His work on skilled migration and diaspora networks will offer crucial insights into our discussions. A special welcome to our guests of honor, Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastava, Dean of the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. His diplomatic experience and policy expertise will provide a strategic perspective on migration governance and India-EU engagement. I also take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished speakers, session chairs, and all selected participants who will contribute to our deliberations through their expertise and perspectives. Your active participation will be instrumental in shaping the discourse on migration in coming days. As we begin this journey, I encourage all of you to make the most of this platform, engage in discussions, build collaborations, and contribute to a more nuanced understanding of migration issues. Once again, I welcome you all, and I look forward to an enriching and productive workshop ahead. Now, I request our organizing team members to welcome our guest on the dais with flower bouquet. Thank you so much. Now I request Professor Mattu to chair the session and steer the proceedings forward.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastava, the Dean of the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service, Ministry of External Affairs, former Ambassador of India to Croatia, former Deputy Chief of Mission to of India to Japan in Tokyo. Professor Vinod Khadaria, old colleague, friend, and one of the great thinkers on these issues. Professor Umu Salma Bawa, a chairperson of the Center for European Studies, but also an eminent scholar in this area, and the mover and shaker behind this project, behind this seminar today, workshop today, Dr. Shakti Prasad Sri Chandan. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues and friends, it's my great pleasure to be part of the inauguration of this, I think, extremely important conference, particularly in terms of its topicality on Indian migration to the European Union. Generally speaking, we all know that the narratives of migration, the discourse on migration is not just about stories of movement. And we have had the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas recently held in Orissa. But there are profound reflections on hopes, struggles, aspirations, and often more and more struggles. As we gather here, we must recognize the complexities surrounding migration, particularly in light of recent global events, the policies being implemented, for instance, during the second tenure of former US President Donald Trump, especially the deportation of migrants to Latin America and to India, to Punjab recently, have sparked significant debates on immigrant policies worldwide. The situation exemplifies the delicate balance between national security and human rights, a balance that is increasingly being tested across various contexts. I remember last year when I was in Melbourne, or maybe it was a year before, we had the overseas premiere of the movie Mrs. Chatterjee versus Norway, and Rani Mukherjee had come there. This film, which anyone interested in migration must watch, is based on a case, a real life case that brought to light the intense emotional and psychological toll of migration policies on families, particularly where children are involved. Mrs. Chatterjee, Rani Mukherjee in the film, but Mrs. Chatterjee is an actual character who lives now in West Bengal, underscores the urgency of reevaluating our approaches to migration, ensuring that the voices of those affected are heard and considered. I mean, such instances like Mrs. Chatterjee's plight remind us that behind every statistic is a human story, one of love, loss, and above all, in this case, resilience. Has every one of you seen this movie? Yes, good. Now, in the context of India and the EU, and the topic today of challenges and prospects, you are all the experts, and this is an area all I know is that we must navigate thoughtfully and carefully given our challenging times. Economically, migrants we know contribute generally positively to labor markets and fill often critical skill gaps. But the fears surrounding migration have led to a backlash. We must ask ourselves as scholars, how can we advocate for the economic benefits of migration while addressing the anxieties that lead to restrictive policies? And this is really goes to the fundamentals of identity, nationhood, citizenship, and all the areas surrounding these issues. I believe that culturally, the integration of Indian migrants, wherever it's happened in Europe, has enriched the cultural fabric. But mine is not the only voice. There is the contrarian voice, which suggests that this has provoked tensions as well. The experience of Indian migrants in the US, illegal as they may be, under deportation policies and the struggles of families like Mrs. Chatterjee, highlight the importance of fostering an environment of understanding and respect. How can we learn from these experiences to promote dialogue and harmony between migrants and local communities in Europe is another not just a policy challenge, but an intellectual challenge. Of course, above all, given our Westphalian societies and states, legal frameworks have to be, whether we like it or not, at the forefront of our discussions beyond the humanitarian and intellectual challenges that we are confronted with. The complexities increasingly greater surrounding visa regulation, residency rights, pathways to citizenship often are issues that go deep into the whole policies of migration. In America, the whole idea that H-1B visas will no longer be a pathway to acquiring a green card, or that birth itself, although that I think the order has been stated, that birth itself is not recognized as citizenship, is something that has already provoked a policy debate as well as debates on the streets. How can we push for equitable frameworks that support migrants and their rights rather than alienate them? We must also consider the impact in the past of global crises like the pandemic, which has reshaped migration patterns and prompted us to rethink our strategies. The policies observed in the United States and the distressing narratives of the cases like Mr. Chatterjee. And I keep repeating Mr. Chatterjee because I think it does reflect many of the, in its story, many of the concerns, both intellectual and policy, that form part of the debate on migration. We must strive for a more balanced approach in Europe, one that prioritizes human dignity alongside security. After all, even as there is a quest towards realpolitik, remember that Indians have always championed normative principles of foreign policy. And if there is a single experience that brings these together, is Gandhi in South Africa. So as we embark on our discussion over the next 2 days, I urge today, just 1 day?
2 days.
2 days, yeah. I share you all to address your concerns as well as develop greater insights on this issue. I think we can intellectually perhaps develop the skills that we need to understand the many debates and perhaps help to find policy alternatives to the ones that we have today. It's our good fortune that someone who served as an ambassador to Croatia, Ambassador His Excellency Rajkumar Srivastav, is here with us today, and I'm sure he will bring to bear his experiences on this issue. But before that, I think it's Professor Salma Bawa, the Jean Monnet Chair and Chairperson of the School of International Studies of the Center for European Studies. I was reading it out and I said, "You've taken over the deanship, or you become the super dean." So, Professor Bawa, may I request you to give your inaugural address, after which we'll hear Professor Vinod Kataria and the grand finale with Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastav.
Thank you, Dean. Good morning to all and a very warm welcome on my behalf as the chairperson of the Center for European Studies. No threat to your job, Dean. We are not in the process of doing any coups over here. Europe has learned its lesson. I'm extremely happy to welcome amidst us the Dean of the Sushma Swaraj Foreign Services Institute, Ambassador Srivastava. For many over here, your presence today is probably the point they will look at the culmination of a journey when they leave JNU. So they're looking at how probably there would be the next set of officers coming there for training under you. So I'm extremely happy that my colleague, Dr. Shakti Prasad Srichandan has invited you today. Professor Kataria requires no introduction to an esteemed audience over here. He has been part of the JNU fraternity and family. So welcome back to the family fold again, or you join us, I think, at evening time from the US. Thank you so much. Friends and my colleagues and dear students, I think, let me just say a few words to an audience like this and tell you about the Center for European Studies. It's 2025. We celebrate this year 20 years of the existence of the Center for European Studies, which has excelled academically. I myself came to JNU in 2004 after many years of teaching in Delhi University. And although the Center for American and West European Studies had existed right from as an anchor institution of the Indian School of International Studies, it was clearly evident that post the end of Cold War that a reorganization in terms of how the knowledge bases are created needs to be taken ahead. And so that is the happy occasion today that we are now this year in June, officially 20 years. And as I was speaking to, Ambassador Srivastava and pointing it out, he also drew attention to something extremely important. In 2004, the strategic partnership between India and the European Union was signed. In 2005, the Joint Action Plan, came into being, and then we also took shape over here. So the multiple, points of intersection, happy coincidences, but more importantly, as a center, Ambassador Srivastava, we are 9 faculty, 68 students doing full-time Europe. And this year we brought in a fresh batch of 21 students. So I think over these last 20 years, more than 100 PhD. I'm not going to count the MPhil dissertations. We, I think, crossed more than 150 over there. So a huge knowledge base which has come out from the School of International Studies. And further to that, the recognition from the European Commission with the Monnet initiatives which are there, as you're familiar with. We've had, now 4 chairs, multiple modules, and a center of excellence, which all again recognizes what, the center, both and in the School of International Studies and at JNU, what we have built up as a knowledge base. So we are very happy about that. And may I flag just now that this 2-day workshop, on Indian migration to the EU is part of Dr. Shakti Prasad Sityanan's module, which he received on migration issues in the EU. So that's a little brief backdrop about us and where we are situated. And as I come to, to give my address, I want to highlight first that what we are discussing, the word migration, which actually has political, economic, socio-cultural, and security aspects to it. And depending where one is framing it and where one comes into it, it becomes actually, for us as researchers, extremely fascinating to look at how this human element of people transforms to either become an opportunity or it becomes a cost or a challenge. And how very soon this human element can deteriorate to become a threat perception to people. I mean, you would not think that another individual can become a threat in such a way. But when you put numbers together, and there is a theory on numbers, it can either see as an enabling factor, or it is seen as being developed and constructed as something of a threat. And so why is it that human beings suddenly transform from a very positive dimension to one that constitutes that there is the othering taking place is extremely important. And as a center, we have had many students focus on this and do research on this element. I think in the current context, it's important to point out that India has for long seen, and migration in effect deals with at one fundamental element is mobility. As long as we've been having mobility and, the Dean pointed out to the Westphalian state, it's important to recognize that over an extended period of time, politics has drawn lines across territories, imbuing them with legality and also seeing that your right to move across these territories is bound within a rules-based framework, which is mutually recognized by states on both ends, thereby creating a political nature to the whole idea of mobility, which we take it as granted and given. As long as we're looking at mobility within a national context, and you can look at the Indian Constitution, the right to freedom of movement is embedded in Article 19 of the Constitution, right? And so we don't think about it. But even then, when projects come up, one talks about internally displaced people. We talk about seasonal migration, people moving because their livelihoods. We can even talk in a more positive sense, like a university like JNU is actually known because students from all over the country are here to study, and we take it as a positive development. One doesn't look at it in a negative. This is constituent of the ethos of the university that everybody has come in. What happens and what transforms when that very same set of individuals start moving to improve their prospects? As long as it is within the frames of rules, we talk of migration as a net positive adding factor, right? It becomes positive in the sense that it is bound by rules, drawing our attention immediately to the other element or the binary of this construct, where we say of legal, and then we immediately are confronted with the point of illegal migration. And I think that is where a lot of the issues come up today when we're looking at relations between states. When we talk about people going without valid documents. There's been a recent movie on that. I think many of you must have seen it, about going to countries like Canada, and there was also a case about
Dunki, huh?
Dunki, and there was also a case about a flight which had gone to France, was on its way to, I think, Salvador, if I'm not mistaken, and there was the Indian, embassy in France intervened, and we were able to bring the people back. So, I mean, what is it, at a fundamental question one has to ask, if this human element, what is it that, makes people want to travel, take a risk where they are going to expose themselves and their near and dear to extremely vulnerable conditions, which can even, mean danger to their own life and very existence. So if the idea is to improve life and livelihood is the reason, if that very life is going to be threatened, you start wondering what actually pushes a human being, what makes them. It's not that there's an absence of facilities over here. So what is the lure of the outside which draws people in? And then more importantly, how does it manage? And I think that's where in the India-EU relations, I think it has become part of the discussion for quite an extended period of time. If you just look at the figures which are going to Europe, we have more than 2 million. It depends on which category you're going to count, the non-resident Indians or the Indians, resident over there, or long-term, or people of Indian origin. But I mean, if you just look at some of the countries, then of course, UK tops #1, goes without saying, in terms of both the old colonial point and the new and English language. It has been the country of destination, with huge numbers of more than almost 4 lakhs. Germany is now really come up. I was talking to the German ambassador the other day. I said, your push to project Germany as a destination for education has paid off. India is now the largest group studying in Germany. We have overtaken China. Which tells you, but I said on the downside, you can't get a visa very soon. So you probably have to get that worked out. That's also part of this migration and mobility. And then the list goes on. You've got Spain with over 50 to 60,000. You've got other countries, then Italy, more than close to almost 2 lakhs now, both documented and undocumented people over there. And then we've got other countries which you wouldn't think of: Sweden, 15 to 20,000. There's Poland and Portugal, 10, Netherlands, of course, older movements and younger, but 40,000. France, 19 to 20,000, and I could go on with that. But I think if I situate where in the bilateral relations between India and the European Union, this has become an important factor. You have to go to the high-level discussion on migration and mobility, which came up in 2006. And recognizing early on into the starting of the strategic partnership that this is an important critical area which needs to be flagged, and therefore the discussion began. And in 2016, we got the migration and mobility in terms of the common agenda on migration and mobility. So that is important. And in this common agenda, 4 priority areas were identified, which tries to encompass the various elements of migration and mobility between India and the European Union. First, of course, was the emphasis to get better organized regular migration. Clearly, the EU goes without saying, if you look at the statistics, is a destination point because of the state of economy. And despite all the reports you read about, something is hitting a lower curve at this point. The other day somebody said the policies as a consequence of the war in Ukraine has impacted Germany's energy policies. And so the German economy is going down, the largest economy. It goes without saying, it is still one of the largest economies, right? And therefore, the potential, what it offers to people is huge. People are not looking at the daily fluctuations of the stock market. What they're looking at is a better life, a better quality of life, and they're looking at it. So the first point it talks about is well-managed mobility. Now, it means that it's not a permanent residence, but it's about the ability to go and come back. And that is critical, right? I mean, how is it that both sides are going to look at it? Second is, of course, if it's a well-managed, you want to prevent irregular migration. And more important than that, what this movie was talking about is trafficking of human beings, right? Because people will end up in all kinds of dangerous situations. A third is to also look at from a development impact of migration and mobility, because remember the remittance which comes about. And so it's also important to look at how you could look at social security issues. And this is not only something between India and the EU, but also between India and the 27 member states, which is extremely important. And a fourth point is, of course, about promoting international protection. Clearly, we can't look at India-EU migration and mobility in just a purely bilateral framework. One has to recognize that migration is a universal phenomenon, which is constantly happening. And so it is in this context important to note that at the global level in 2018, the Global Compact for Migration was adopted. So clearly, the fact that in 2018 there was this Global Compact, I think also signaled, because this is an intergovernmental consultation, it's non-legally binding, but the fact that the countries around the world were able to sit and talk about a very acute human element, which contributes both to growth and well-being, but also becomes a source of conflict, when not managed well, was extremely important. And I think three words stand out from the Global Compact on migration. Those three words are safe, orderly, and regular. Now, one can take a very narrow view of this and say, oh, that's a very legal way of looking at things. This is not a very human way of looking at things, right? But the point is, when you have a crisis, or when people of your country are caught in a situation of crisis, the onus of trying to assist your people will come on the state. And I'm sure, Ambassador Srivastava, in your various positions you've had, you probably have encountered smaller elements of it. We're looking forward to hearing on that. But I think when the war broke out in Ukraine on 24th of February, our first immediate concern was these 20,000 plus Indian students, medical students, right? And then the response is, they didn't ask the state and go to study. But then the expectation is that there will be an MEA phone line, which will be immediately operative and somebody will get them out, right? And that draws the attention to why the state becomes so critical to some of these discussions, because the state is the nodal point where our rights are given by the state. Your rights as a citizen flow from the state, and it goes without, much to see that the response when a crisis comes is not at a personal level. Everybody looks to the state to bail them out or get them out of it. So safe, orderly, and regular, non-legally binding 2018 document, has come into being. And that just kind of, lays down the threshold at which you can interact and take. But a fundamental point for us, and I think for those who are doing research on migration and for us as scholars, is to ask that how is this human issue, assuming this kind of criticality today? And I think you've got to look at what the backlash of globalization has done. You've got to look at how there's a return, at least in the European context, a return to national politics and national identity issues, which have come back very, very critically. There is the emergence of the far right across Europe without any exception. And one can't forget that in 1945, as World War II came to an end, Europe, which came out of the ashes of World War II, would actually proceed on the most unprecedented journey politically, which we can talk about, and a journey which has been extremely successful. It's no longer a project, but the idea of 1957 of of Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman to think about politics and cooperation beyond war would produce the unprecedented process of regional integration, but power sharing, right? It was the idea of building an identity which was beyond being just French and German and Spanish and Portuguese and all of it. And the success of it has been that other countries have joined. What began with 6 countries grew to 28, and then Britain, of course, decided in 2016 for its own political reasons to step out, and now they're again negotiating how do they get a good equation back. But I think it showed that there was an ability to look at identity in a larger context. And migration at one level is also about identity, about how we socially locate people. We only, one element of migration, and we have to look at it very earnestly, is it wants to only extract the labor part of it, right? It does not want to engage with the human element of the individual, the culture, the identity which comes. And so that becomes the baggage. I only want that. We've seen the positive side of it when it works. I mean, you have the US green card, very successful, a long waiting line. Trump is saying he's going to change some of it. Let's see. And on the European side, a recognition that India really has much to offer, but also that they would need skilled people to come into Europe, and the blue card has come. So I think I just want to flag, 3 just concluding points over here. One is, at the end of the day, migration is to be seen in terms of how do we legally construct it in terms of our commitments, but how do we as India, negotiate better with the European Union also, since we're now at this point negotiating the free trade agreement, we've got the investment agreement going on. And so this is very important in that. Second, the demography in Europe is declining. The need for people, skilled people in all various capacities is only going to increase. How do we better manage, this bilateral dimension of the relationship in which people are going, in which there's a benefit to us, in which our people are protected? And how do we internally within the country, we also have to look at how do we discourage and bring down this kind of irregular migration, which actually produces a threat. People are in that sense not able to even send remittances, but don't have even documents, and they don't benefit out of it, right? If you are going to be slaved to somebody else or become a slave labor, that's not going to help. Third is, for those doing research, is how do we connect the dots on politics, economics, security, but fundamentally at a very important level is about human rights. Human rights is not just a construct which is coming from the West. One has to emphasize that. It is part of the Indian discourse, which is here. And very often, sometimes in this languaging which happens, the West will try to push and say that we need to adopt their frameworks, right? We've got to also recognize and be able to tell them, we adopted a constitution in 1950 where we centered it on human rights. So it's important to recognize that. And as researchers, I think I would exhort all of you to push yourself to engaging with thematic areas which are more challenging and help produce a rich knowledge bases. So with those words, I'd like to once again warmly welcome all of you. Thank my colleague, Dr. Shakti, and give the mic back to the dean. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that extremely thoughtful and incisive address. May I now request my friend, Professor Binod Khadaria, Professor formerly of JNU and President of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, to give his keynote address.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mattu. Thank you, Amitabh, my friend. It's heartening to come back even on the screen, as Professor Umu Salma Bawa has said. I am one of them. I am one of them, of course. And thank you, Sakti Prasad, for very dearly inviting me, despite the fact that I expressed my reservation in terms of not making it technical by just coming on the screen. But you insisted that I still be present. It's midnight here, so I'm burning the midnight oil. Thank you so much, and glad to meet Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastava, and of course the 37 students who have been handpicked by the screening committee for this esteemed workshop. And I can also see that some of the other instructors and teachers or mentors are my own former students here. I will not take much time in formalities and introduction because I am conscious that this is very punctual and time, strict time is limited. I myself always have been very punctual. I say that our seminars go not by minutes, but by seconds. So let me see if I can also rise up to that. Having said that, it's a pleasure to link up with what Amitabh started with, and Umu Salma Baba also provided the context, the right perspective in terms of the entire background of the center, of the topic, of the subject, the field. So that makes it very much easy for me, and I'm going to use the PowerPoint to help me and see whether it makes sense to you. Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I make it big or it is okay?
In slideshow mode, you can make it.
Slideshow mode. Okay. Slideshow mode. Yeah, that's slideshow mode. So that's the front page. And then this is familiar. This is familiar to everyone. This is the India's high-level committee at the end of the last century came out with 20 million Indians abroad. And out of these, 3 diasporas were identified. Large diasporas, Southeast Asia on your southeast side, you can see 33%, 32%. That was all indentured labor, which started going to the colonies, the sugar colonies of Fiji, rubber colonies of Malaysia, and so on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. And then, of course, the modern diaspora, with finally United States becoming the final destination of 10%, and of course, colonial UK, 7%, and then came Gulf, the oil phenomenon. And then you have all these other countries which are also having Canada and so on. Europe is minus UK is 3%. And within Europe, EU would be even smaller. So that's why I've said India's 20 million migrants comprise 3 main diasporas, saw EU. And then the US Census 2010 predicted that by 2020, that was 10 years after the census, India will have 47 million such workers. Professor Baba mentioned that labor is one of the main component of migrants, and that's how these 47 million surplus migrants will meet 80% of the world deficit. 17 million in the US, 17 million in Europe, and 10 million in China, 9 million in Japan, and so on. So these are in public domain. When you do your research, you can certainly refer to these kind of sharing of data and information. You can see that these are this latest is 2024 bilateral corridors of migration. Of course, the largest one is Mexico, United States, which is under the radar right now. And then out of the other, you will find very few are European corridors, and that's where you find Germany was just now mentioned. So you'll find Germany, and you will find some other Poland versus Germany, Poland and Germany, and so on. So I'm not going to spend time on this. This is available in World Migration Report 2024. So you can refer to that. This is something interesting. We call it Fortress Europe, but historical, even the United States was like a fortress for Indians. Not only Indians, Fijians, Chinese, Asians. And this is a caricature which I picked up from the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service yearbook in the Library of the Congress. And you can find this caricature is that like the Trump wall. Here you see the literacy test as a wall, that if you don't know how to read and write English, then you are not welcome in the United States. And the nibs are like bayonets, the inverted books are like the roof of the wall, and Uncle Sam is looking down upon these migrants with their bundle, with their kids, with the wife or women partner. And ironically, the flag says the land of the free. So this is US, of course, is known as the nation of immigrants, and now perhaps one has to tend to put a question mark there. So I called it keeping brown out of the white West, and this I reproduced actually in my 1999 book called The Migration of Knowledge Workers, which is out of print now. I don't know whether to be happy or unhappy at that. It's available in the library. See that this literacy test was vetoed by Woodrow Wilson 3 times, but it was still passed because Woodrow Wilson said this is against the spirit of America, the nation of immigrants, but it was still passed. And so for next half a century, Indians could not get into the United States. Only Nehru, when he went, he had some negotiations, and later on, this is a field. Migration is a field which is multidisciplinary, which is interdisciplinary, as Professor Bawa has mentioned. So you see, till 1968, when the new law came in the United States, because we are talking of we are on the global turf in migration, you can see that these are India's leading institutions, educational institutions, from where the migrants, most of the migrants, the top class migrants, are not in the country anymore. And that's what is called the brain drain. The genesis of STEM migrants worldwide started coming from India in 1968. And you can see the batches, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, on your left top, 56% are abroad, 3 out of every 5. And IITs, if you look at these 3 IITs, Bombay, Madras, Delhi, then you'll find that roughly 25% of the IIT graduates are not in the country. And this figure has been going up and up, and I don't have to tell you the stories of JEE, the coaching industry. The entire trail of complications is created by this golden gate of trying to go to the NASA, to contribute to to Silicon Valley, and so on. The story is is unending. It still continues with the American dream. Of course, European dream has not been there because Europe was known to be the fortress Europe, and so on. So what is the current scenario? If we look at this, this can be looked at in terms of 4 phases. Pre-1991 phases, when students were going and professionals were going separately. And the professionals were going to the labor market, students were going to the education market. They were getting degrees and coming back. And then we find the second phase, 1991 onwards till 2000, 1991 to 2000, that education became the gateway to get entry into the labor market. So you go there, complete your degrees, and then get H-1B visa and things like that. Not going to go into the details. Phase 3 is 2001 to 2015, which is the Millennium Development Goal period. And that's when you find OPT extension, which is optional practical training. So, the selective migration started from there. If you are highly skilled, you are welcome. If you are low skilled, you are not welcome. That's what that started. And then you find phase 4. We are in phase 4, 2016 onwards. That's the Sustainable Development Goal period, And you find that the main entry point has now become education, through education, and then you stay on. Now we have 4.6 million tertiary students worldwide, and many in European countries. So if we look at the transitions in multilateral migration negotiations from Millennium Development Goal to Sustainable Development Goal to the Global Compact for Migration, which Professor Baba already mentioned, so that's easier for me to refer to. So we find that for the purpose of migration to Europe or European Union, 9/11 in 2001 was the turning point, because that's when the American immigration policy became stricter, and students and others actually were looking for alternatives. They wanted to go to Canada, Australia, European Union, Europe, and so on. That's when the English language higher education started in European countries in a massive way. And I don't have to mention, Sciences Po University and all those things. Then 2002 GCIM, Global Commission for International Migration. This was because you see, migration has always been a hot potato. Nobody wanted to touch it. Trade is fine. Exchange of goods and services is fine, not human beings. And that's why Kofi Annan started GCIM, Global Commission on International Migration, for 3 years in 2002. It completed in 2005, piggybacked on development agenda, because development agenda was the blue-eyed baby of the United Nations. So he created this term, migration and development. It was piggybacking on development. And then we had the high-level dialogue that Professor Baba already mentioned, 2006, and that was the starting point of the GFMD, Global Forum for Migration and Development. First one was at Brussels in European Union. And then it was annually to alternate between a developed country and a developing country. Now we call them Global North and Global South. And then last year it was hosted by France, but in Geneva. Which, you can understand that there are wheels within wheels, and Geneva is not part of European Union. Switzerland, which is part of the Schengen countries, Schengen group. So you do have so many categories to look about. This year, ironically, it's going to be in Colombia. And Colombia is a country where the deportations took place. And the president sent his own aeroplane, unlike India, to bring them back. So you find that in between, in 2009, despite challenges of harmonization among the member states of the European, it adopted the European Union Blue Card. The Blue Card was actually a response to the, to the downsizing of the Green Card, so that Europe can benefit what was the loss of the United States. So Germany prioritized Indian IT professionals coming to Germany. But as it was mentioned that it is a socio-cultural issue, in Germany there was a resistance called Kinder statt Inder. That means children instead of Indians. And so the German government had to scale it down. And so the European Union, the fortress Europe prevailed, continued to prevail. There is highly racialized societies are there in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and so on. And one has to go into the history. So, however, you can see that it was the 2015 European flooding of Syrian refugees that actually gave the awakening call. Europe stood divided, Germany and Hungary on the true side, and that, of course, Brexit took place. That was also mentioned. And then high-level committee, etc. 2017, IOM given the status of UN Migration Agency, and the GCM was to be adopted. US withdrew from GCM under President Trump, and now later on under Biden it joined, and now it's on the brink of losing, and followed by Hungary. And that's how it goes on. And in Marrakesh, Morocco, it was signed in 2018 on the World Migrants Day in 18 December. And against this background of transition, EU is now an active player in the talent war. The talent war with US, Canada, Australia, and so on. And the sort of task before the researchers, to my mind, is to find a context. What context you are going to study India-EU migration. And all the contexts are available in the GCM objectives. The GCM objectives, there are 23 of them. Some are universal, some are country specific. Well, you need to choose wisely and delimit what is called the delimiting of the universe of discourse. Because if your discourse is too wide, then you can't do your PhD or research or postdoctoral. So as it was mentioned, safe, orderly, regular migration, that is the motto. Questionable. I was myself the thematic expert at the United Nations in New York in 2017 when it was being debated, and I just tongue-in-cheek asked, I can understand safe and orderly, but what's regular? And somebody said it's opposite of irregular. So one can go on debating these things. And out of that 23, objectives, I would say that you choose. You have to choose. You cannot address all of them. Some you combine, some you split, and then insert a time horizon, time frame by when these objectives should be met in India, in member countries, and so on. Now, tomorrow, later, in a long period of time. There are 3 catchphrases, which are called the whole of government, the whole of society, and no one to be left behind. So you can look into what are the implications of these. These are some of the objectives that I have listed, which you may find relevant, but not all of them. These are easily available. You can go look at the yellow color at the bottom, what I have written. And currently, the objectives on detention, on consular protection, on safe return has come into prominence with the deportations. So to contextualize, I would say the talent war in global north for accumulation of global human highly skilled migrants and selectively handpicking knowledge workers comprising what is called STEM professionals. STEM is science, scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians, but also students, STEM students as future workers, as future professionals. And those not having those experiences are marginalized service workers who nobody wants. So this discrimination was questioned by GCIM, Coffee Annan's report of 2005, saying they're all important. If you forget unskilled migrants, then you cannot do any production of goods and services. So they are equally important. But within 6 years of that report, you find all the countries across the world just became more and more selective. All countries, most developed countries, less developed countries, least developed countries. Whenever it is a destination country, it is selective. And then you have this phenomenon that India has a demographic dividend on the scene. The age cohort of migrants started coming down from postdoctoral to doctoral to masters to undergraduate to high school students. And that's why what happens with that? When students go abroad, you also send money. Money also flows there behind them. And I call it reverse remittances. So India's finance capital also goes to the global north. We have had such stories of the colonial times when India was drained of its wealth. So this is also, I think, on the horizon. And you can see these images of World Book Fair. Sorry, not World Book Fair. At the back of my mind is the Delhi World Book Fair. World Education Fair, where you negotiate, you get admission, you get 7%, compete for 7% of the scholarships. The rest of it comes from your parents' money, from bank loans and so on. It's a whole story of wheels within wheels. US concern, I'm quoting President Obama's 2014 State of the Nation address. Are we a nation that educates the world's best and the brightest in our universities, only to send them home to create business in countries that compete against us? Or are we a nation that encourages them to stay and create jobs, businesses, industries right here in America? This cuts across party lines. This cuts across Republicans also. When the COVID-19 struck, the mobility stopped, travel bans were in place, and no application was entertained for green card, for citizenship and so on. But if you are a doctor or if you're a nurse or if you're a vaccine scientist, then you are welcome to apply for green card under Trump. So you can see how it is selective. And now the US industry is worried if H-1B visa cut is there. So I say what is needed of us researchers is that you challenge the traditional knowledge of what is called the traditional pull-push theories or push-pull theories of global north, and contribute to a new theories or contribute to new theories based on what I call a trinity of migration conflicts as the new determinants of migration. And what is this? I call it age, wage, and vintage, just to make it stylistic so that you can remember it well. Age means that most destination countries are now preferring to have younger workers, younger people. Demographic dividend, we very well we can fit there, versus temporization of labor migration. So if they also say that these should be temporary migrants, so that after 10 years we can send them home, and we have a new batch of younger migrants. So it's a cycle which makes them precarious, informal labor markets, and so on. Wage is that if they are young, if they are temporary, then their wage is low. There are no perks. There's no pension. And so total wage bill is low, means you are more competitive in the world trade, comparative advantage, and nomadization of the family, because then only workers will go. If you're not permanent, you will not take your family. And then, lower perks, pension, and pay cuts the savings. Savings goes down, and if savings goes down, then remittances will go down also. So you can see how they are all interlinked. And the last one is age-wage vintage. The last one is a vintage of knowledge. It is accumulated knowledge among our youngest cohort of students, because the latest knowledge is embodied in the latest batches of students. And I think they call it the education fairs, they call it recruitment of students. I think it is wrong terminology. It should have been enrollment of students, but I say it's a Freudian slip, because what's at the back of their mind is the future workers. They are recruiting future workers, human capital, and then that leads to reverse remittances, as I had mentioned. I think I'll stop here because my time is perhaps up, so that we are still on time. But I will say that it is a massive field, and you have to be very selective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinod, for that very comprehensive address, and really something that has brought home the vast expanse of the field and why it's important to be selective and careful in terms of our choices. Thank you for joining at this unearthly time. But that reflects your passion and your commitment to.
Thank you. I'm among the friends.
Yeah. And now may I request Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastava, the Dean of the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, to deliver his address. Ambassador Srivastava.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dean. It's my pleasure to be with you, and the topic, the place, and the purpose has made me accept this invitation in less than 24 hours. So I'm very happy to be here. We are neighbors. So Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service is neighbors. So neighborhood first policy also is part of India's foreign policy. That's another reason. Out of 27 years of my diplomatic career, I have spent 11 years in Europe. So that's another reason that I'm here. And the topic that you are covering is very important, and I'm going to tell that part more in my 10 minutes of intervention. I was ambassador of India to Croatia between 2020 to 24. And there was, out of 5 pillars on which a lot of development took place in these 2 countries, one of the pillars was about demography and talent. And I think that's what is your workshop all about. Let me think about a framework, how I analyze a relationship between 2 countries or regions. So there are 4 Ds: democracy, demography, diversity, and development. And I think when you look at India and EU relationship, the democracy and diversity is something on which there is a convergence, political convergence and historical convergence. Europe, while sitting from here, might look very uniform, but it is very diverse. Even religiously, the whole word of secularism comes because within Christianity, there is so much of diversity. So since I've lived 11 years in Europe, Spain, Austria, and Croatia, I thought I must share this aspect that there is a clear convergence in terms of our understanding of democracy and how we have evolved as society in terms of diversity. On the front of demography and development, there is complementarity in today's time. So you look at Europe, population is roughly 35% of what is India's population today, 1.4 billion people of India, and in Europe it is close to 490 million, which is roughly, you can say 1/3 of India's population is what is EU's population. Average age of India's 1.4 billion people, 29 years. And for average age for Europe, it is 45 years. So you can see the complementarity in demography. And that's why this migration happens. India's migration does not happen. There are 5 basic reasons why migration or mobility takes place. One is about education. Second is about business. Third is about family reunion. Fourth is about employment opportunities. And fifth is about compulsions of climatic or human-made disasters. So the last one, fortunately, India has not been part of that because we have a big land, we have a big diversity in our country. So migration, if it has to take place, it happens within India, from east to west. We are not part of that last part of migration. But the first part, because of the nature of Indian globalized economy, even more so after post-COVID world, I think we are going to have to discuss this issue threadbare and become leaders on this, on migration and mobility. And that's why I think we, as a government, we are working very, very strongly on it. I'm very happy that you put my presentation at the last, because I don't have to now repeat what you have already very beautifully described in terms of the academic framework, what has been happening in global landscape. I think Professor Binod has explained it very beautifully. So some of the things that I wanted to say has already been covered. But I will tell something about what is happening between India and EU at the strategic level. And that is a big change. Even though India-EU strategic partnership was signed 21 years back in 2004, last year we celebrated 2 decades of this partnership. Next summit, which will be the 16th India-EU summit, will be hosted by India this year. Last one happened in 2020, which was the 15th summit. And because of COVID, we could not do, and also Russia-Ukraine war. Some of these external factors resulted into the next summit happening after 15th, now after 5 years. But what happened in 15th summit was very, very good, because we signed a 5-year roadmap of action plan under that strategic partnership. Migration was one of the key issues. High-level group on the migration and mobility has already met 8 times. And I think that's a very important pillar of our relationship. What has happened in this 5 years between 2020 and now is that we have done a bit of re-energizing our discussions on FTA and IPA. So that is a trade pillar, which is going to become stronger. Just in January, our Commerce Minister was in Brussels to discuss the dialogue on this trade issues to expedite some of the issues. We have exchanged the first lists of goods that can be part of that agreement. So that is a good development. Second thing that I wanted to mention is about the migration that we have already discussed. The third is about Trade and Technology Council. And I think TTC is a very important aspect of India-EU strategic partnership. Why I'm telling it? Because once you have that kind of understanding at a strategic level, people-to-people relationship becomes much more easy to flourish, because there is a general recognition that we have to make our people meet. So the default mode of negotiation is let's make it happen, rather than let's question why it should not happen, which is the mindset change that has happened between India and EU. And I think that is why the future is going to be much more exponential growth than what we have seen in the past. And that's why your work of next 2 days of workshop of deriving out what can be the future way path in terms of what has been achieved will be very useful. As our External Affairs Minister says, that track B should help the track A. And I think that will be the exercise that you will do in the next 2 days. Let me also mention 3 important specific development, which proves my point that future ahead is going to be much brighter in terms of mobility and migration. So one is about that we have signed 6 agreements already, bilateral level, all 4 big countries in EU. So that is starting with France, Germany, Italy, and we have signed it with Austria. We have signed it with, I think, one in Portugal and Denmark. So 6 countries, we have already signed mobility and migration partnership agreement, what we call MMPA. And that's very important because much of these, except Portugal is labor connected agreement, but all other 5 are mobility, which means it's mostly about education, like people who are students who are moving, business people who are moving, and it is mostly about white collar jobs. But there is a demographic requirement in Europe about blue collared workers also. And I think that is big change that is happening. More people from India have gone to Europe, more they have proven that they are multitaskers. They can take those jobs in a much more efficient manner. And also, Indians do not take their personal preferences outside in the street. That I have heard in Croatia a lot. So give you the statistics. 3 countries that I've served. In Spain, in 1999, when I went 4 years, roughly there were 20,000 Indians. Today it is 57,000. 3 times growth in 20 years. In Austria, in 2009 to 12, I was there. There were around about 20,000 Indians, 18,000. Now it is 31,000. In Croatia, in September 2020, when I reached there, there were 250 Indians living there, including 25 from the Indian embassy. And when I left in September 2024, there were 16,000 Indians, from 250 to 16,000. And that's why I mentioned that out of the 5 pillars that we worked strongly in Croatia, one of the biggest one was this. Not that we were promoting this migration. It was happening because of the natural flow that was required. And I give you specifics about Croatia. Croatia became part of Schengen and Eurozone on 1st January 2023. So naturally, there was huge money that was coming from European Union to the tune of 25 billion euros over 5 years period, which was basically grant to be spent in 3 pillars: green transition, digital transformation, and societal integration. Now, that money has to be executed in terms of projects, but there were not enough people to execute much of those projects, whether it is construction, mobility, hospitality, agriculture, or we talk about agriculture or industry. So basically, in these areas, this number has grown from India, but not only from India. From Nepal, it was 0, it is now 15,000. From Philippines, it was probably 100, it is now 7,000. From Bangladesh, it was 0, it is now 5,000. So they have got this movement of people for employment opportunities in Croatia in last 3-4 years because of the funding coming, projects requirement, but not enough people to execute those projects. But having experienced different diversity of people in the working class, they have now come to conclude that Indians are the best. And that's had been told to me, not because I'm Indian ambassador, because I have picked up this information from various sources. Out of 16,000 blue-collar workers, as we call them, I would say at least 15,000 of them are happily working with the complete satisfaction of the employer and the employee. There are around about, I would say, 5-6% who are actually in those cases where something called human trafficking happens because of the agents involved. And what we are working on that is use technology through our e-migrate portal to make sure that the employer and the employees directly get connected. And that's very important to harness the technology to make sure the middleman's role is reduced, not only in migration, but in many factors that we are doing in India. So the digital public infrastructure of India is going to be the leader in terms of solving some of these problems which are globally faced. And that's why we are moving away from this nomenclature of labor to talent. And that's where I come about 4 T's. any relationship has to be organized, have to be analyzed. What is the trade relationship? What is the technology relationship? What is the tourism potential? And what is the talent? So these four T's are important. And again, in there, if you see trade and tourism, it's more like both India and EU benefit from each other. But when you talk about talent and technology, they're complementarity. Technology, India is the source. India is sourcing technology from Europe. And in talent, Europe is sourcing talent from India. So again, there is complementarity and convergence in 4Ts as it is in 4Ds. So I think what you are going to do in the next 2 days, keep that in mind that there is a new path that we have come to in terms of India-EU strategic partnership. Movement of people will be very crucial to strengthen that partnership, because at the base of our relationship, especially in democracies, it is the people who build the relationship bottom up. It is not top down. And that's the strength of India-EU relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Delightfully articulate and incisive and precise. Now, Shaki, I'll hand it over to you.
I request the head of our family, Professor Baba, to present mementos to our guests.
Shakti is a technological.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Family is also getting.
Family first.
Thank you. Request us to.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the workshop's convener, Dr. Sakti Prasad Srichand, the organizing team, I take immense honor to thank Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastava, Dean, Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Services, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, Professor Vinod Khadria, President, Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, Professor Amitabh Vattu, Dean, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Anusarna Bala, Chairperson, Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and all the distinguished faculty members for their intellectually stimulating insights and gracious presence. I also thank all the participants for making this session a great success with your valuable presence and time. We hope the coming sessions will be a great learning and memorable experience for one and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we'll take a group photo. If you can just quickly come in the back, set up bakery.
Okay.
It's better than.
Participants. Hello, please.
ये प्रोफेसर सलमा बाबा विल शेयर इट किरण को कहिए उनको वो दे लिंक पे लिंक पे भेजें हाँ हाँ बस आ रहा हूँ 2 मिनट में आ रहा हूँ ये पहले स्टार्ट करा दीजिए बोलिए कुछ सारे जरा बट इमीडिएटली बोल दीजिए ताकि सबको कम्युनिकेट
Please, all of you, please.
It's the most criticizing, I mean, लंच चले गए ना हाँ क्या बात है तो मुझे चेयर दिया और मुझे आप कह रहे हैं कि मीटिंग किस चीज़ से मीटिंग मैंने कहा कि ना चलिए चेयर उसको कर दो बहुत इसमें सेलेक्ट हो गई
Thank you.
Yes, everyone.
Yes, yeah, please.
With the,
Are you going to be here for now 3 years?
can we have the faculty, please? Can I have all the
Yes, absolutely. This is a very important topic. So one of the reasons why I think this This topic.
And we what you might do, take your time. Good morning, sir. I know. Thank you. Please join us for the IT. I need to rush off because there's a meeting which I have to go for. Thank you. ठीक है.
Please for high tea outside.
Please join us for a high tea outside. Okay, we have half an hour. So please join us for the high tea.
20 minutes come back, जो आधा घंटा लगा दो.